and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham-Pars incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Please remember to visit the website podcastufo.com for past episodes, blogs, and forums. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have an interesting show for you this evening. We have two guests, and before our guests, of course, we have the one and only Alejandro Rojas coming up with the UFO updates. But tonight we have our first guest is Dr. Irena Scott, and she's going to be talking about her new book, and that's 70 Years of UFOs. And she has quite a background, PhD, and she also worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency. She identified satellites and things like that, really interesting. And she worked for MUFON, or worked with MUFON, I should say, from 1993 to 2000. Again, quite a background. You can see that in the show notes. And then after that, somewhere around 9:15, when he gets home from the HuffPost, we have Lee Spiegel, and Lee speaks for himself. Of course, he's a repeat guest, real interesting guy, fun guy. So he'll be on in the second hour. And so I want to thank everyone that supports the show. And that will cost you just a couple of dollars a month or more. It's up to you. That information's on podcastufo.com. We are live streaming on YouTube. You can watch us live every Wednesday at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on our website or on YouTube, and there's a chat room there. It's a lot of fun. And if you can't support the show and you want to listen for free, you can also listen on Thursday evenings on the Dark Matter Digital Network, and that's from 10 to midnight. And if you do support the show, I do want to thank you so much. It makes all the difference in the world. It's an expensive show to run, actually, and it's a gold-plated problem. We get a lot of downloads and a lot of bandwidth and a dedicated server and all that stuff. So that's it for me. Alejandro, how are you doing?
I am well. How are you, my friend?
I am great. I love this time of year, and things start getting warm finally.
Yeah, finally getting warm for you guys. It's getting hot out here. It's funny. It's been about 90, in the upper 80s, around 90, which actually is really nice out here. But Sunday, for some reason, that one day was 98 degrees.
Wow.
Yeah, really crazy, which is definitely warm, but not as warm as it can get. So a little taste of what we'll be experiencing in a month or so.
That's right, yeah. And, it's not – I like the desert heat compared to the humidity on the East Coast. It's –
when I moved out here, I thought, how the heck would people live out there in those crazy temperatures? But it's doable, and I love the sun. So I find it worth it, actually, surprisingly. Not everybody does.
Yeah.
Some people like snow. I like to run away from
I feel like
snow.
running away after this winter. I really am not happy here as far as snow goes.
Well, I mean, you keep talking about moving out here. Do it, man. I mean, then we're already online, brothers.
No.
We can be living near each other, hanging out more, just conquering the whole UFO. We would, if we had our power combined in one place, we would figure this whole thing out in a matter of hours.
The Phoenix Lights would make daily visits if we were in one place, probably. You never know. Exactly. Could happen.
Mm-hmm.
No, so I will keep that in mind. So what's going on in the world of UFOs this week?
Well, today is Alien Day, allegedly. Wow. So there's lots of alien stories out there. Did you know that?
I thought I saw something on Facebook about that, but I didn't know it was something official. And who the heck did Trump make that official? Who made that official?
No, I have no idea. I think people just put it on a website and claim it, and it just people run with it. People like having this day and that day. I know there's websites devoted to what day it is, and so who knows? It's probably multiple different things. But yeah, Alien Day happy Alien Day.
Hey, aliens out there, happy day.
And speaking of aliens, some of the big news today that you'll see in our headlines. So when you go to, of course, we post headlines every day from mainstream media. And if you go to openminds.tv and you look at articles and go to daily UFO headlines, you'll see all of the headlines. It's a great resource for seeing what's going on in a glance. But last week, the Breakthrough Initiative had a whole conference about their findings, of which they haven't any. But essentially, you may remember this. This is the thing where this Russian millionaire or billionaire started this project, and there's a SETI side where they're listening to messages. They talked about messages, and he's also still going to build these little craft that are laser powered to go to the next solar system. Pretty amazing. So they had a conference about that. So that made some news. I guess they said they still haven't discovered anything, but that's not too surprising. They haven't been around. This is their first conference, I believe. They haven't been around that long. So that's pretty interesting.
It sure is. I don't know how they could track something like that, though. Is it just like going out there?
Well, they have like these lasers. I guess once it gets out there, it's going to take quite some time for the signal to get back to us, but not as long as you would think. I can't remember the details. I know we have a story on it. But yeah, it's going to be possible for them to send data back. Wow. So pretty cool.
That is. Wow. That's good to see that moving ahead.
The other thing is that's pretty cool. You and I have both interviewed Cheryl Costa. She's spoken at our conference, the UFO Congress, and she wrote a book recently. I interviewed her about the book. You may have also. I don't think you've done it that recently, but her book, because she is really good at reaching out to the media, and journalists like hearing from other journalists, and I think that helps. But she has gotten a lot of great attention, and she got a very good article in the New York Times. She didn't write this. It was about her book. It was called People Are Seeing UFOs Everywhere, and this book proves it. It was a story in the New York Times.
Yeah, that's pretty big. Something like that in the New York Times.
Yeah, that's really big. That's really cool. A couple other things. So that was really cool. A couple other headlines real quick before we get into
deadly headlines?
Sightings.
Is that what you said before?
No, a couple more headlines.
I'm just teasing you.
They're not deadly at all.
Okay.
Yeah. If you keep messing around.
I won't, I promise. Okay.
No, just kidding. But another one is Coin Week. And, maybe some of you have seen like this coin with an alleged alien on it. Well, this article explains how that happened, what that coin is, and everything. So it's a great article. It's by some coin collectors who are just like, hey, for today we're gonna set this story straight. So it's a great analysis.
Is it kind of like
coin.
The paintings that the early, not Byzantine but later paintings that have what looks like UFOs in it? They're all explained basically. Is it kind of like the same thing?
Not at all. Not one bit.
I'm gonna have to do me some reading if you're gonna leave us hanging.
Completely dissimilar. Actually, some of those old photographs haven't been explained, although some have. But in this case, on this coin, they assumed there was a hobby where people take these coins, and this is, over the years, and they kind of screw with it. And they carve them to make the coins look different, sometimes as a joke, sometimes for the artistic enjoyment of it. And so this person assumed that's what it was. And it's an interesting historic article. You might like this. And however, then he did some more research and found out it was actually a Photoshop. So he's able to show how actually and he shows the original coin. There's no doubt, what the original coin was before it was adjusted. And
I hate that.
Yeah. So it's a Photoshop job.
Wow.
Those fakers out there.
That's not good.
Yeah, somebody got real mad at me this week, by the way, for kind of, there's a story that came out about Secure Team 10. And
yes, I saw that.
This guy who's really upset with him Okay, and someone got mad at me for posting that. Speaking of hoaxers, but I'm sorry, I wouldn't say someone's a hoaxer if I didn't, really feel there was ample evidence to prove. So
Yes, I saw that, and they're losing revenue from YouTube. Basically, all the ads are pulled.
Yeah, something like that. So otherwise, a couple interesting sightings out there posted by Roger Marsh on our site from MUFON. And one of those is a guy in Australia. I'm not going to attempt to say the name. I heard you attempt to say the name once, and it almost sounded like you were saying something vulgar.
Shinneblonigan or something, yeah.
No, way different. But this was at 6:50 a.m., so it's a daylight sighting. It was March 14th, 2017. He actually got a couple photos and a short video. The video you can't really make much out. But in the photo, you do see kind of just a little white object up there. I suppose it could be a balloon or junk floating around. The witness said that, it did move kind of steadily and quickly. And so they didn't think that it was a balloon or anything. But, so that's kind of an interesting case. I think, to me, unsolved. But we'll see. And, a similar photo is posted from California, but this actual photo is not from the site.
It's a rendition?
This was a photo. Well, not a rendition either. The witness went online and found a photo similar to what they had seen and submitted it. So that caused confusion. But this was another daylight sighting, 2:45 p.m., March 16th, 2017. So both of these not too long ago. He said the object seemed to be bus size, maybe 1,000 to 1,200 feet up. It crossed 60% of the horizon in 8 seconds. He said that, him and his wife both saw the object. She thought it might be a drone, but he didn't think so. And if it's covering 60% of the horizon,
that's really fast.
That's a long distance. So, yeah, real interesting. So there wasn't any photo, but what's interesting, I guess, is that the photo of what he said the object looked like is very similar to the other photo from Australia.
Yes, I know. I saw that two reported in 1 week. Very similar.
When we were talking about this sighting before, you had mentioned, or you had used your Australian accent.
Wrong. No.
Oh, there it is again.
Can't do that.
No. Yeah. It was
we have people listening right now from Australia, and they're gonna, they're not gonna be happy because I'll butcher it, Mike.
Fun of them. I love Australians.
I do too.
So, to you Australian listeners, we love you.
We do love you, mate. And I really got to get there someday.
Ben Hansen goes there.
I know.
Our mutual friend, he goes there quite a bit, and he's never invited me. And
I know. What's up with that?
Sore spot for me. I haven't brought it up with him, but one day I will.
Yeah.
He'll go missing.
Wow. Well, is that it for this week?
That's it. I am done. There's the news, people. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember, openminds.tv is where you can find all of these links. Thank you very much for having me on the show, Martin, and I hope the rest of your show goes splendidly.
Thank you. I do want to give you a little bit of a plug because I listened to the show you did on Monday, Susan J. Palmer, and the new UFO religions. That's the title of that show. She wrote a book. It's a great interview you did with her. Very interesting. All these, these, I guess you call them cults out there. And starting back before I didn't realize they were around so long. Mm-hmm. The one that sounds like Gralian. I don't know what it's called, but started in the 1970s, and then some are left. One is a leftover from the contactee movement and all that. Really good show. So check it out. That's on openminds.tv, and that was a podcast last Monday. So thanks so much, Alejandro.
Yes, thank you. I knew you would love that show. It was a great one. So thank you very much.
Thanks. All right, everyone, hang in for this quick music break, and we'll be right back with Irena Scott. Hello, welcome to the show, Irena.
Hello.
Thanks.
Great to be here.
We connected good first try. You never know when it comes to phones. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'm excited to speak with you this evening about your book, because that was kind of, now I know you were involved with MUFON for a number of years, but I wanted to ask you, what was it that got you interested in the topic to begin with? Because you have quite an academic career and also a working with the government, which I think is pretty interesting. So how did it all start with you?
It all started with when I was a kid. I was sort of almost born with an interest in astronomy, and I majored in it in school, but I couldn't get a job because I was a female, and they didn't hire
You're
females.
kidding, really?
So,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, I wasn't real versed on everything, on how to apply and things like that either. So I went into what I could get jobs in, and I wanted to get something that was close to astronomy. And the only thing I could really get into was mapping. They were mapping other planets and the moon and things, which I hoped to get into, but I didn't. But I wound up working for the Defense Intelligence Agency in satellite photography at first. And so I learned quite a bit about government work and security and things like that. But later I got married and moved to Nevada and started at the University of Nevada. But there wasn't any astronomy or telescopes or anything there. So I majored in physiology, and then I was able to get a PhD from the University of Missouri, the veterinary school, in physiology. So that's how my wandering career went around.
Oh, wow. And how did you make the move over to MUFON from doing all that?
Well, I'm just a hobbyist on UFOs. I've been in science my whole life, so I'm not much of an expert on this, but I'm very interested.
You know, you're kind of a rare person, not totally rare, but unless you can set me straight here, do you know a lot of other people in the science field that have an interest in UFOs?
I know some. A lot of people say they don't believe in UFOs, which to me sounds just like people that believe in UFOs. I think some of the top ufologists, though, have been astronomers and scientists.
Yes.
Some are quite interested.
Now,
but some don't admit it. They're interested.
Right. There's a great article. I think it was Seth Shostak, or it was some major astronomer that said something along the lines where astronomers never see UFOs. Well, that's not so. There is a great article on Open Minds about that. Alejandro wrote a number of years ago. Alejandro was just on our show here. If the listener has an interest in that, there's a lot of astronomers, and actually next week, I'll say this at the end of the show, but anyway, next week I'm going to be at an astronomer's house who just built a observatory dome, and that's Mark D'Antonio. He's a repeat guest. I'm going to be down at his house, and we'll be out there. Should be a lot of fun. So had you, when you started to explore UFOs and got into the topic a little bit, and like you said, it's a hobby, I understand that, but did you ever get any ribbing from any colleagues?
I still do.
You still do?
So that's fairly familiar with me.
Is it bad, or or people, do they accept it, or how does it go?
It just depends on the person. I've got the most ribbing, I think, from relatives that are in
from relatives.
Scientific careers.
Yeah.
Relaxed about ribbing me a whole lot. But I also got some ribbing at work, and I tried to not let anybody know I was doing that, but they found out. But a lot of people are open-minded too.
Yes, I had mentioned a number of times. When I had a UFO sighting, I had mentioned it to one person at work, and I said, "Please don't tell anyone." And everybody knew within. It was 30 people, so everyone knew within a week or so, and I was so glad when they finally stopped talking about it.
Well, that happened to me too, and so I got some ribbon.
Yeah, and just move on. I mean, what else can you do? It's not like the end of the world. I've never lost. I have a professional career too, and I've never, so far as I know, I've never lost any business because of this topic. And a number of people that are in my trade have found somehow online that I do this, that have actually had sightings themselves. So I've had a lot of great conversations out of this. And
well, I found out that too.
No. I was just going to ask you if you had similar things happen as far as people talking to you about sightings and things.
Well, in general, you may get ribbed, but people will come up to you later and say, "Yes, I've had a sighting," and I've had people that I know very well that I didn't know anything about it that have had close sightings and sightings of big objects and a lot of other things, which surprised me because they never talked about it, which I didn't either, so I understood their position.
Yeah. Now, I don't have it right here in front of me. What, again, is the full title of your book?
It's UFOs Today, 70 Years of Lies, Misinformation, and Government Cover-Up.
Okay, so, and that's going to be...
It can be...
Oh, pardon me, go ahead.
I'm sorry. No,
that's going to be available, is it June 1st? And you can pre-order it now on Amazon?
That's right.
June 1st, okay.
If people just say that title and maybe put italics around it, they should go right to the Amazon website and find it.
Okay. So I want to dissect the title a little bit. Is that really what the book is about? All those different things, the government cover-ups and the lies and all that? That's interesting. And what type of research did you do? And, I'd like to talk about, what's involved in the book and stuff like that. But anyone writing a book has to do a lot of research. So how did all that go?
I think, well, I cover the subject of UFOs chronologically from the beginning of the modern type of UFO ideas, starting a little bit before Kenneth Arnold, and go through UFOs from then to now, and also the cover-up from then to now. And I think what makes my book unusual is because I've worked in some of the places where a lot of the research took place. And so, although lots of people, some people write about government cover-up, I was actually working in the government, and so I had a better idea of what goes on. And
had you seen examples of government cover-up in general when you were working?
I was pretty familiar with security, which a lot of people aren't. For example, I worked at Battelle Memorial Institute, which did a big study of UFOs. They're a top company that also were involved in developing the Xerox and that sort of thing. I talked to a lot of people because Battelle did a study back in the 1950s of UFOs, and a lot of people were aware of it then. And so I kind of learned the history of what goes on with security. What happened there was that they had an organization that studied foreign technology, such as Russian technology, and technology such as any country that might be sending anything here that's dangerous. And this was classified. Well, it appeared that when they did the UFO study, this just sort of funneled into the organization that was already set up to study foreign technology. And so I thought probably the same thing happened in the federal government, that the whole idea of UFOs kind of was born classified, because at first they thought UFOs were something from another country.
Right.
And then it's kind of been classified ever since.
Well, I know going all the way back to the Foo Fighters, during the war, it seemed like everyone thought they were from, the other country, which I think is fascinating. And I someday I'd like to do a show just on that alone. It would be really interesting if someone had ever during, I know there aren't a lot of people left from World War II, but it still would be interesting if there were some really good accounts of that. Orbs, a lot of times they say, and things like that. So then you obviously talk about the Kenneth Arnold case. That's really what a lot of people consider the start of the modern UFO sightings. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. Oh, I viewed it as kind of boring. I mean, it's 70 years ago, and I thought he saw flying saucers, and so what? One day I was in a used bookstore in the 1970s. Back then, people actually read books, and they had all these used books with flashy titles and colors and everything. And I was just in dreamland looking at them. But for some reason, I pulled out this really boring-looking book, and I looked at it, and it said Kenneth Arnold was the author. Well, I thought this is very boring because I already know he saw flying saucers. But for some reason, I just couldn't put it down, and I walked up and bought it and took it home and started reading it, and I was just amazed at what I found out, because it was the 1970s, and it was after Watergate, whereas he wrote it in the 1950s, and there was a huge difference in the view of the government since then. In the 1950s, people accepted if the government gave an official pronouncement or said something, everybody thought it was official and true and everything. By the 1970s, people had evolving ideas on that. And so reading it, I don't think too many people read it to start with when it came out. But reading it in the 1970s, and I've been reading it a lot since, it was really fascinating because a lot of weird things happened to him after his sighting. And at that time, they just explained it as happenstance or something unusual or coincidence. But after reading it and knowing more about the government, well, it made a lot of things that happened seem like something the government would do to hide things. And so I had the impression that the government, from that, there were a lot of suggestions the government already knew something about UFOs.
You think so all the way back to that sighting?
Well, I just said that was a suggestion, and in my book I listed a lot of coincidences. Also in the book, we talked, there was this man named Cordell Hall that was one of the top statesmen. I think he was Secretary of State for the longest time of anyone. He was called the father of the United Nations, and Roosevelt wanted him to run as his vice president, so he was a pretty high-up person in the government. He had a cousin, and we talked to the daughters of his cousin, and they said that he took his cousin into a room, into some type of sub-basement under the Capitol, and that they had 4 bodies in jars in formaldehyde and a crashed object, that was around 1939, which caused us to question whether the government had some idea of what was going on for several years before that.
Wow.
Before Kenneth
So that was
Arnold. We don't know if it's true.
Right. That was supposedly Cordell Hull.
Cordell Hull.
Mm-hmm. And I had a question come in on our forums, and someone asked, do you know of any corroborating witnesses to the original Kenneth Arnold sighting? I'd never heard anything about that.
Yes, there were a number of witnesses. There were a number of sightings. And before his sighting made publicity, there were a lot of sightings, but nobody viewed them as possibly craft from another planet or something, that type of modern idea. They just didn't know what they were, but they reported them. And there were a whole lot of sightings that people later combed through the newspapers and found. There were some right at about the same time. For example, when he had his sighting, which was June the 24th, where there was a prospector on the ground that probably saw exactly the same thing he saw at the same time. And the prospector reported it. He also had a telescope, and he looked at one of the objects through the telescope. And besides that, when the objects approached him, he had a compass, and he said the compass spun, which is very remarkable, and it's not something that would happen with a typical airplane, or any type of airplane, I should say.
Right.
And there were a number of other sightings.
Yeah, so I know that, his made a big splash when, he came back, and I know that's where, they were not saucer-shaped, they were crescent-shaped, but I know that's where a reporter said when he was describing them, he was trying to describe their maneuverability, and he said something about like skipping like a plate across the water, and that's where the phrase "flying saucer" actually was coined out of that whole thing. But people did actually see saucer-shaped craft after that, a lot of them. So it was a very fitting coined phrase, actually. And there was a lot going on. I know after that, I wasn't aware that there was a lot of things going on before that, though. But you're saying there actually was around that same time?
I was just using suggestions. I think there was a lot because they've studied the 1947 sightings, and there were quite a few. And for example, Arnold met this man called Captain Smith, who was piloting a commercial aircraft. And he had also seen 9 objects flying through the sky. And Arnold became friends with him, and they investigated the Maury Island event together. And there seemed to be a number of sightings, but people didn't connect them to the modern idea of what UFOs were, I don't believe, until after Arnold.
I know that Arnold actually was involved in the Maury Island, investigation. And I've heard a number of people have mentioned, I don't know if there's any facts out there, but that ended up being a hoax. Have you ever heard anything about that, the Maury Island incident being a hoax?
Well, I discussed it in my book because it was, people said it was a hoax by these 2 people that were presenting themselves as harbor patrolmen. And everything says it was a hoax. But the trouble is, it seemed to be a lot more involved than anything that 2 men could do. Because if I read Arnold's book in his own words, and he seemed to be a very honest person and very intelligent and qualified. And this was just at the beginning of UFOs, and when the government didn't exactly know what to do either. But it seemed like it was a much more complex hoax than 2 harbor patrolmen would do. It seemed like they were a lot more involved than just this simple type of hoax.
Do you know where?
And so I thought,
Do you know? Pardon me. Do you know where all that this has come from in recent years? That people are claiming it was a hoax. Do you know how all that started?
Well, I think it was a hoax, and that's how it's presented. But as I read Arnold's book, it just seemed like it was a lot more involved than just some little hoax that two harbor patrolmen could do. Because I don't even think they were harbor patrolmen, for one thing. But things became complicated pretty fast because he was supposed to go just to start out with, he was a man paid him to go investigate the Maury Island thing. And he started out and he thought he was over his head, and so he asked this Captain Smith to come, and then he later asked the government for help, which is a very intelligent thing to do because lots of people don't ask for help, and he did. Mm-hmm. But he took off on his plane to do the investigation. He didn't tell anybody he was going anyplace. He didn't file a flight plan. He didn't take a radio. And he flew to, I think it was Tacoma. And when he got there, he couldn't find a hotel room. I guess the place was very crowded with no extra rooms. He looked all over for a hotel room. And then finally, just for a lark, he called the most expensive hotel in town. And it turned out there was a room reserved for Kenneth Arnold. And he thought, well, somebody else named Kenneth Arnold has a room reserved. But he was desperate for a room, so he took it, and he was going to let somebody else, when they came, take it. But no other Kenneth Arnold ever showed up. And that was, the start of unusual things that happened. But if this was just two simple harbor patrolmen, how would they have the money to do something like that to start with? And then there was good evidence later that the room was bugged too, and they couldn't find bug him and Captain Smith in their room, but they and these two people that were involved in the Maury Island hoax were all in the room at the same time, and somebody was calling a newspaper and giving verbatim reports of what was going on in the room while they were there. So none of them obviously were doing it. At that time, they thought, Kenneth and Captain Smith thought that bugs or wiretyping or things involved a big wired-in machine called a dictaphone, and they looked all over their room for anything like that. But it looked pretty obvious that their room was bugged, and by a much more complex bugging instrument than what they knew about. So that would suggest maybe the government was involved, and maybe more people than the known hoaxers were involved.
Now, there were also people that there were two servicemen that actually crashed that supposedly had some type of evidence or what they thought was evidence at the time. Is that a true part of the story?
Well, it was in his book, and I just used his book as a reference because there's so many stories that can come from anywhere, and at least I knew where these were from, and it came from a trusted source. He said that among the many odd things that happened was that he had that sighting on the 24th of June, and you would expect the government to be very interested immediately, but nobody contacted him until the middle of July. And he was really curious, and anybody else would be, why did the government take so long for something that sounded pretty important? I mean, that could be like the 9/11 bombers, recently and things like that. But he heard from the government the middle of July, and this was from a Captain Davidson and Lieutenant Brown, who were stationed in Hamilton Air Force Base. They were the government investigators they got killed later. They seemed very intrigued by UFOs and were actually watching for them, which suggests they weren't totally involved in a cover-up, but they were like everybody else and really curious about him. And they interviewed him then. Then later, when he was in Tacoma investigating the Maury Island hoax, they had told him in July if anything came up to call Brown at Hamilton Field. And so when he was investigating this hoax and figuring out that it was a hoax, and he was very confused about everything because it seemed, from what he reported, it seemed a lot more complex than some simple little hoax. And he called Brown from his hotel room, and Brown refused to take the call on his military phone at the base and called him back from a regular phone that wasn't on base. And that seemed really, really odd to me because he was a government investigator. So he should be taking the phone calls on base. Huh. And so he and Davidson came again to see Arnold and started investigating this hoax. And at the end, they thought it was a hoax too, as Arnold and Smith did. But this was something that I just wondered about. Arnold, one of the hoaxers wanted the military people to take samples of these things that were supposedly dropped on them from a UFO. The military people didn't want them because they thought it was a hoax.
I see. Mm-hmm.
So one of the hoaxers still wanted them to take them. And so Arnold lifted the container of this material into the plane, and he said this didn't look anything like the material he'd seen, and the box was very heavy. And this isn't something anybody has speculated about at all, but I did. Anyway, the plane took off with Brown and Davidson in it and crashed, which seemed funny. The government said, oh, this is just nothing, coincidence. But I always wondered, from his description of putting the box in the plane and everything, whether there might have been a bomb in it or something. But he'd met these government people before, and they seemed very interested, and they were the government investigators. But something was very fishy when he couldn't call them on the base, like the government was investigating them or something. And then they died in a plane crash right afterwards, right after they saw him in Tacoma. So the whole thing seemed very, very strange. And Arnold nearly got killed too.
Really? I never heard that. Wow. What happened?
Well, he wondered if it was some kind of mind control because he was a really good pilot. And he started home. I mean, all this death and everything was going on. Everybody's worried about everything. And so he was very careful about checking his plane. And he stopped for refueling at an airport. He was very careful with his plane because he knew these people just died and that something weird was going on. So he took off, and his plane died. And the only reason he survived because he was just a really good pilot. But it turned out his fuel tank was turned off. And the only way he could figure out that it was turned off was because he had turned it off himself. And he didn't really, I don't think he knew anything about mind control, but he speculated that something was controlling his mind. And that was another thing that seemed pretty weird about the whole thing. He would have been killed if he hadn't been a super good pilot.
Wow. Huh. How about that? And I wonder why he thought he didn't have any thoughts of sabotage at all. He just thought he somehow did it.
Well, there wasn't any evidence that they'd been around his plane. And that's the same thing with the Brown and Davidson. For some unknown reason, when they went to Tacoma, they had their airplane under guard the whole time they were there. So the only thing that entered their plane seemed to be that box of fragments. Later, somebody told the newspaper that they were killed because they were carrying UFO fragments. But that seemed like a part of a very complex setup as a hoax. I mean, more complicated than just two people would do. So I just thought the hoaxers were employed by maybe somebody else that had a whole lot of other people working on it too. But Arnold, he was very careful with his plane because these other people had just been killed, and there wasn't any evidence that anybody had been around tinkering with his plane or anything. He just, checked it over well, took off, and his fuel tank was turned off. So he didn't really think it was anybody except himself.
Wow, amazing.
And he, of course, didn't understand how he could have done that.
How about that? I know I used to do some flying. I know you did too. And you go over your entire plane, every single thing, you want to check before you take off, including that. So going back to those phone calls, there is someone on the message board that read a number of books on Maury Island, and he said that they even switched hotel rooms and the mystery caller continued. Did you ever hear that?
No, I just went straight by what Kenneth Arnold said, and didn't go into other sources because I didn't know whether they'd be right or not. So I didn't hear that. No, they seemed to be in the same. From what he said, they were in the same hotel room the whole time.
I see. Okay. Now, what about the next big case, of course, which was really big for a day and then kind of went away until I think it was 1980 or something like that, is Roswell. That's only a couple of weeks later, somewhere around July 6th through 8th, something like that, when the whole Roswell story breaks, or July 7th or whatever it was. So I'm sure that is a case you talk about because a lot of people are saying, as far as cover-ups, that's probably the number one talked about cover-up crash or sighting or whatever it was that there is. So I'm sure that's part of your book, yes?
Yes, we uncovered some new witnesses to the event, some brand new witnesses. There's been tons of books written about it. But these books list a lot of witnesses, but so far there's only been about 4 or 5 people who have actually said they saw bodies and that sort of thing. Our witnesses did. We're still investigating, and the book's embargoed right now, so we're not talking about it in detail. But in the book we talk about a deputy sheriff who saw the bodies and saw the crash and saw the unloading. We don't know if it's true, and we're still checking. But he made a video of it, and he seemed to be a fairly honest person.
Okay.
So I can't go into detail.
Well, I know I know Tom Carey, Kevin Randall, and Don Schmidt have been working for years on this. Originally going all the way back to Stanton Friedman, and who's the guy that bowed out of the UFO field. They wrote a book. They wrote a book in the very beginning.
Oh, Berliner?
What's that?
Berliner and MORA.
MORA is who I was thinking of, yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, a lot of people have really dove deep into digging up witnesses. How did you find ones that were considered new? How did that happen?
It happened through Philip Mattel, who gave me the information, the video, and everything. And so I put it in the book. I tried to investigate a little bit, and it needs more investigation. But it was very interesting.
All right.
And I don't think anybody had heard that too much before that.
So the argument, it always comes up when you talk with a skeptic that I've had a number of people on the show over the years. And, they always say, oh, it was a mogul balloon. That's why they kept it secret. And of course, it came out, the Army Air Force captured a disc, one day, and then the weather balloon the next day. And one of the things I've always wondered is why they ever said anything at all. I don't know what good or what purpose it would have done at all for them to say anything. Is bizarre. Is very bizarre that happened to begin with. But what are some other interesting things about that case that you found out when you were looking into it?
Well, one thing I found out was that in the archives of Roswell, there was a newspaper reporter, somebody on the radio, that was reporting on the trip of the airplane from Roswell to Wright-Patterson. And right in the middle of the report, he said he called Wright-Patterson, and they were expecting the airplane carrying the debris to land there soon. And I thought that was very hard evidence that something went from Roswell to Wright-Patterson.
Yeah, it was actually called Wright Field at the time, but that's yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's a really good point you're making, though, is why. That's another thing. If it was a balloon, if it was a mogul, even the top secret mogul at the time, why on earth would anything at all be flown anywhere? They were all familiar with everything.
Yeah, that's what I didn't understand either, because at Roswell and at Wright-Patterson, there's balloons on display, such as the mogul balloon. And at Roswell, these were the top elite people in the world. That's the group of the 509th was the group that dropped the bombs on Japan. They were the only people that could do that, and it was a very advanced, complex place with lots of people and intelligence that knew everything. And you just couldn't imagine that they would stake a balloon for a UFO. I mean, that seemed, if they can drop bombs, they should be able to identify a balloon.
Yeah.
So I didn't understand.
Yeah, I know. None of it makes any sense. And it's, the problem with Roswell, the most talked about, of course, I think that there is in this field is Roswell, is that time has just moved on. There's some newer cases with people still around. Everyone that was around in 1947 is in their, basically in their 90s, if for the most part, or not here. There's no one left.
Yeah.
And so I've said this a few times. It's turning into almost a mythology. It's and I just wonder, if indeed time goes on and we never find out the exact truth of what it is that's in the skies, what Roswell will be like in 100 years. They'll still have the festival probably, but I just don't know. It just seems like it loses power as time goes on.
Well, it's been investigated to death with a lot of theories. It was totally strange that they would make this announcement that they had discovered a UFO when the only thing anybody reported looked like a mogul balloon. So you wonder if they were covering something up. And there's been evidence here and there that there was, but you don't really know. The government report said it was a mogul balloon.
Yeah.
But that still causes you to question why they wouldn't recognize a mogul balloon.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so that mystery will probably just continue, and I don't think there's ever going to be any earth-shattering evidence that has anything to do with Roswell. I mean, we were all on our edge of our seats a few years ago when the Roswell slides supposedly came out, the mummy, unfortunately. So I don't think there's ever going to be any breaking news at this point. So from there, what are some other? Do you in your book do you basically focus mostly on American sightings?
Yes, I do. I mentioned some foreign sightings, but I mainly focused on American sightings.
And are there some other ones that are really interesting that you found out some additional information on that you looked into?
Well, I looked into a number of ones, and one very interesting one, I don't know if everybody's heard of it, was called the Portage County UFO with the deputy sheriff Spar and mounted deputy Neff.
No, where was that?
It took place in Ohio. It was in the 1960s, but it was an excellent study, even though the government just really quelched it. It started out in Michigan, and the whole event took place across 2 or 3 or 4 states. Somebody in Benton Harbor, Michigan, reported a UFO. The police radio contacted, Neff and Spar heard the report on their police radio that there was a UFO, that somebody'd seen it in Michigan, which was some distance away. Everybody laughed about it. Then they were told they were supposed to go investigate a car that was off the road. So they went, looked at the car, and then this big UFO came over the trees. It was very bright. It just lit everything up like daylight. They were terrified and just seemed to almost expect to get melted, and they ran for the car and got on the police radio. They were in Ohio then. They called their station, and the man there said, "Shoot it," which they thought was probably a pretty bad idea. But they began to follow it, and they were in contact with the station by radio the whole time they followed it. It traveled around 100 miles an hour. A whole lot of other people saw it. It seemed to be interactive. For example, when it went over towns, it would be at a fairly low altitude. When it went over town, it would raise and then come back down to a lower altitude. And they said it was interactive in that if they got in a traffic jam or something, it would wait for them. And so they followed it into Pennsylvania. There were a number of other sheriffs and all kinds of witnesses that saw it. Finally, they ran out of gas and everything, but the machine kept on going. And they had been in contact with the authorities the whole time. But then Wright-Patterson investigated it and did the usual cover-up. And even though there were all these witnesses and just an amazing sighting, Wright-Patterson said they had misidentified Venus and maybe a satellite.
Was this Project Blue Book?
Uh-huh. I think his name was Quintanilla. He was the head then. And made them into laughing stocks, even though they had one of the best UFO sightings ever. With many witnesses, they were in contact with the authorities on the radio the whole time. And people said they had scrambled jets, but it was too slow for a jet to follow.
Mm-hmm.
They had it on radar, and the whole thing was covered up.
Wow. I like those cases where there's police involved or sheriffs or whatever, the law enforcement, because of 2 reasons. And one is I don't care what some people say. I think they're better observers than the average person because that's, part of their job. Also is the fact that they are subject to a great deal of, getting ribbed, as you were talking about earlier. It's something they don't want to talk about. So I really love those type of cases. And I may have heard about this because it's sounding familiar, but the one I was thinking of, it seemed like it went from one police department to another type of thing, as it went right into the middle of the night, basically, somewhere in the Midwest. Is that? Do I have that one? Is that particular one? Do you think?
I think it did. There were several police departments that came out and followed it.
Okay, then, yeah.
And I heard from somebody later in Massachusetts that just after that there was a sighting in Boston around Boston that may have been the same thing. So the sighting may have took place over a number of states, and it appeared it was definitely covered up because not only did Blue Book have this fantastic explanation, but the authorities knew about it from Michigan. And in Massachusetts, there was good record that the authorities covered it up and told the newspapers not to report on it.
Huh.
So it appears the whole thing had been covered up the whole way.
Wow. That's very unusual when they say to the newspapers don't report on it. You know, I mean, that's a constitutional right, actually.
Yes, and he had some official information that said that the police and the newspapers are keeping separate information on UFOs that they don't announce to the public.
Wow. All right. So let's hear about some other cases that you found interesting.
Well, what I found the most interesting were cases that had a very long exposure time where people saw them for quite a while. And like that one, where there were a number of witnesses, including official witnesses, and where they were investigated while they were taking place, which is a very good sighting, but usually covered up. We investigated one like that here. It was called the Logan sighting, or the Dancing Lights sighting. It was in the 1990s. These people on a farm went out and saw all these dancing lights in their cornfield, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And they called the authorities. They called the police. They called the television and radio stations, and reported it all over. I think they called the Air Force too. The police came because they heard it on the radio and watched, and they had no idea what was going on, and finally left. The UFOs seemed to be interactive, and for example, a car was coming down the road toward their house, and one of the objects followed the car until it got almost to the house and then quit. Later, they reported that these airplanes were flying over the field in a grid pattern, and one of the interactive objects went up and followed an airplane for a while. I think the display went on until for several hours. All these authorities looked at it. Nobody had any idea what was going on. They never found out where the airplanes came from, but they had reported what was taking place, and people came and looked, but nobody found out anything. That was what I'd call a very good sighting, but didn't make much news.
Yeah. I kind of like the obscure ones that you don't hear about a lot, like that one in particular. That's interesting. So let's move on to another one that you, now you said that was sort of close to home. Do you have a lot of, are there a lot of sightings where you live that you looked into?
Well, I'm lucky because I live in Ohio, and it has Wright-Patterson, which is the chief place that, it's supposed to be the chief place that investigates UFOs and the chief place where the government interacts with people. I think that probably the chief overall place would be in Washington, in some place that nobody knows about. But Wright-Patterson is the most well-known place, such as Blue Book.
Right.
And so I've we've investigated a lot of things around here. For example, in the 1950s, Wright-Patterson employed Battelle Memorial Institute to do a study of UFOs. It was secret at the time, but since I worked there, I found out lots of information for people that worked around there. The government wanted to do a study of they wanted to, first of all, they wanted to do a questionnaire of how to get information from people, but they also wanted to do a study of all the information on Blue Book and to examine the top theories on UFOs. The top theories were that UFOs were either misidentified regular standard aircraft, and they studied that by looking at characteristics of normal aircraft that were identified and everything, and of the unidentified objects that were never identified later. For example, and they compared these characteristics. Now, just to give an example, I don't think it's what they used, but for example, in airplanes, they have a strobe light and navigation lights and everything. They have a particular arrangement of lights. Whereas, so you would expect to see a white strobe light or a red or green light around if you see an airplane. Or if you saw a blue light and nothing else, this would be something different. And they compared these characteristics between airplanes and what was seen with UFOs, and the results turned out very highly significant scientifically. In 5 out of 6 categories, the characteristics of the UFOs were different from the characteristics of standard things you see, such as airplanes or meteors. They also had another part of the study where they looked at how much information there was on the objects they were studying. And it turned out they expected to find out that if you had less information, you would be more apt to see UFO, because if you had more information, of course, you would identify it as a plane. But the results turned out just the opposite, that where there was more information, there were more unknowns, and by better qualified observers. So all the results turned out opposite of what the government wanted. But it was a real good proof that something was going on. The government killed the story, though, even though they had the top scientists do the study, and they did a real good study with like 7,000 reports, and they took the best out of those. So basically, the study they did kind of proved that UFO phenomena existed, even though the government said they didn't find anything. And that was a very interesting study, which took place right here close to where I live in Columbus, where I worked at Battelle Institute.
Wow, interesting. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up. We have our next guest; he's ready to go, and so I think that's going to be it for us tonight. I really appreciate you coming on the show. So, everyone, you can go to Amazon and you just type in the title of the book, UFOs Today: 70 Years of Lies. Is it?
Misinformation and Government Cover-Up. It's an excellent book.
I like that. I like the cover. It's very nice.
Thank you.
Right. So thanks so much, and I wish you the best of luck with your book. I hope it goes really well.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the interview.
Yes. All right. And take care. Remember, everyone, you can pre-order that now. It comes out on June 1st, and all you have to do is go right to the Amazon website. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
No idea why that music is coming on. And we will connect with Lee right now. Hang in, everyone. And Lee, how are you?
I'm sorry, who's calling?
How you doing, man? Good to see you.
Oh, I'm good. Oh, so now I see the green screen behind
Yes.
you, and I was hoping there'd be a really cool UFO picture.
Well,
there.
you know, I'm sorry to disappoint you. And actually, I have to turn my camera off because you know, I don't want to distract you. You know.
What, from your ultimate
Yes,
good looks?
that's right. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it. And it's always a lot of fun to talk to you. And up on the screen, people will see in the watching live right now, they'll see an image. And someone wanted to know right away what that was about. I had an email about it. Someone wanted you to talk about that sighting. I know you have talked about that sighting in the past on the show, but that is such a tremendous and interesting sighting all around. J. Allen Hynek, the whole thing. I want to hear that sighting again. Can you talk about that? And this is the
Sure.
one. The craft behind me.
So, and I'm not able
Right.
to see it, right? Because you've got. Wait. So, wow. So you're just kind of leaving me
Yes.
out of the picture,
As usual. Yes.
Do you want me to keep my camera on? Or
Yes.
does it
Yes.
not
I
matter?
need it on just the way it is. Yes.
So I can do things like this, and
They'll
people will
see
see
it.
it,
Yeah,
right?
everyone sees you. So behave. Yeah. Okay.
Well, hello everybody out there in Martin Willis land.
All right. So yes, can you talk about that sighting you had? Was it back in the 70s with down in North Carolina, right?
It was. Right. I was here in New York. I was working on a documentary record album. For those of you who might remember vinyl records back then, and it was a documentary, as I said, and it was called UFOs: The Credibility Factor. And I was doing this for CBS. At the time, CBS had these wonderful early infomercials where they would present music collections or record albums that they would offer to the public in television commercials, like 2-minute commercials on primetime TV. And I wanted this product that I was putting together to be advertised on TV because there had never been a product like that on television, and so they agreed to that. And so it was like the last part of May, and I was in the middle of working on the album, and I was collecting the voices of scientists, military people, politicians, law enforcement officials, good old regular citizens to talk about their UFO experiences almost as one voice, and to try and get some kind of disclosure happening at the time. And one of the early people I interviewed for this was astronomer J. Allen Hynek, who many of your listeners may know. For about 20 years, in the 40s and 60s, he was the official scientific consultant to the United States Air Force's official UFO study called Project Blue Book. So whenever there was a big UFO sighting somewhere in the country, the Air Force would send Hynek to wherever the place was, and basically instructed him to do whatever he could to debunk it, to talk it down, to quiet any kind of growing public alarm. That was his function there. And he was one of the people on my album in 1975. And so while I was working on the album, he called me one day in New York and said, listen, I'm getting phone calls from law enforcement people down in North Carolina, down in Lumberton, North Carolina, just south of Fayetteville. And he was hearing from sheriff's departments, police departments, highway patrol departments. He said they're seeing something strange in the sky for a couple of nights in a row, and they've turned to me, Dr. Hynek, to try and help them figure out what this is. I don't have any investigators down in that area. I know you're working on your album. Do you have time to go down to North Carolina and check this out? And you can do some interviews with the different people that have seen things. And if you get some really good, interesting, credible information, I will publish your findings through the Center for UFO Studies. So I said to him, all right, Alan, what exactly are they reporting? What are they calling you about? And he said, well, here in 1975, we haven't heard much about something called a triangular UFO or a boomerang-shaped UFO. And this is what they seem to be reporting. And I said, I foolishly took the risk of ending our relationship at that point when I said to him, wait, you're asking me to go down to North Carolina and to maybe see a flying Dorito? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's what I want to do. I mean, I sit here in New York researching and writing about UFOs, and I want to see a classic UFO, if at all possible. And he said, look, if you don't want to go, and I said, don't finish that sentence. I mean, Martin, I grew up watching this man on TV reports in the news that whenever there was a UFO thing happening and the government would send him to investigate it, there was J. Allen Hynek, out there in the news. And he and I were now friends at this point. This is not the kind of guy I wanted to piss off or disappoint, So I said, okay, flying Dorito it is. Whatever. And I packed up my bags and went down to North Carolina, and literally within a few hours of showing up there and going to the sheriff's department, the sun had gone down and the calls started coming in to the switchboard at the sheriff's department, and people were just seeing something in the sky that they couldn't understand or believe. And so I got into one of the sheriff's cars with a deputy, and we left, and we stayed in touch with other deputies, other police officers, and other law enforcement people in the area through the car radios. And after a few minutes, we all converged together in front of this big field. And I'll just set the environment for you. It was a field. I don't even know what was growing in it because it was so dark to see. But it was a big field. There was no moon out to cast any glare. There were some stars out, and it was very quiet, and except for the sound of animals in the area that appeared nervous about something. That was the only thing that we actually noticed. So we all got out of the cars, and as we looked directly across the field from where we were standing, there was a line of trees. And we could see that there was above the trees, there was a red light and a white light, and they were just alternating back and forth, red, white, red, white. And this thing, whatever it was at that point, was moving just slowly across the top of the trees until it got to right about where it was kind of directly in our immediate line of vision, and it stopped, and then it started moving across the field toward where we were standing, as if it knew something. And by the way, you can interrupt me anytime here.
No, this is I love hearing this story. And what was the reaction of everyone with you and yourself?
Well, at the moment, we still didn't know what it was. But as it got closer and closer until it stopped and parked itself literally right in the air, right above us, we all suddenly realized it was making no noise. It had no engine. It was just sitting there in the sky above us.
How high up would you say it was?
Well, somebody estimated it probably could have been maybe 100 yards, and it wasn't that far, and it wasn't that big. Someone else figured it was maybe the size of about two of the patrol cars if you had lined them up, next to each other or end on end. It wasn't a very big thing, whatever it was, but because of where it was directly above us, we could then see on the bottom part of it there was a row of white lights on one side and a row of red lights on the other side. And then at the apex of it, up to the top, there was a brighter light. And because of the lights, that were shining underneath it. That's how we were able to see the shape of it. And there was my flying Dorito. It was triangular shaped. And are you actually showing that now?
I've leaned
on your
back
screen?
so people can see it. Someone did that painting for you a few years ago. You sent me the picture right away. Was that with your help, this rendition? Did he ask your help for this or what?
Well, even that story is very cool, and I love telling this. I was at one of the international UFO congresses maybe 3 years ago in Scottsdale, and that's where I got really friendly with a man named Dale Hendrickson. Dale, I was only introduced to him initially because he was a pretty well-known up-and-coming artist, painter from the Los Angeles area who loved painting beautiful outer space astronomical images that he just kind of conjured up from his mind, and he would bring them to the vendors' rooms of some of the UFO conferences and try and sell his paintings. But that's not what he really did for a living, and this just always cracks me up. Dale was and still is, since the very first episode of TV's wonderful show, The Simpsons, Dale has been one of the character illustrators since that show went on the air in 1989. I just love that, and that was more special to me than anything else I learned that year at the UFO Congress. That he was one of the people who was bringing us The Simpsons, and he said to me, I heard that you've had this amazing encounter with something in North Carolina back in 1975. Will you tell me about it? So I did, and I recounted the facts as I just told you and your listeners. And he said, "This is great. Would you mind if I kind of remember what you just told me and do a painting of it, of that actual moment when we stood under this craft, and all of a sudden, from the bright light at the top of it, the front of it, this beam of light came down that you and your listeners can probably see right now, came right down to the ground, right in front of us, and the person who's kind of in the middle of the picture with his arms outstretched, looking like he just got off a plane from New York and can't believe his eyes, that was me."
I'm putting a little arrow to you right now.
oh, good.
Yeah.
You mean like
yeah.
this?
Right.
And so to answer your earlier question, what were we feeling? I didn't know it at the time what the others were feeling, but I can tell you for myself, my first thought was, I'm feeling pretty safe. I'm surrounded by guys with guns and with bullets in those guns, and we're safe. And then all of a sudden I thought, wait a minute. How safe do I really feel here? Because if this thing wants to eat us, then I'm an appetizer, and no one will ever know what happened to me. I mean, you go through, or I went through a combination of intense fear of the unknown, but intense excitement as well. Because how could you not to be standing underneath something like this, and the beam of light, Martin, really only lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it's one of those, wow, it was the longest 3 seconds of my life.
Can you describe? I know when I've spoke to, Chuck Halt, he mentioned, the beam of light that came down was kind of unusual. Was there anything unusual that you can remember about that beam of light?
Just that it was a beam of light coming out of a flying Dorito.
But
really,
it was like a spotlight. Would you say that it covered the ground like a spotlight would?
Yeah. That's exactly right. And and I've been asked this also, and I'll be very honest. I can't remember if when the beam left, if it like kind of went back into the craft, or if the light just turned off. I don't remember that. Maybe because of all the tears that were coming to my eyes. And, and I couldn't figure out. And I was looking around to make sure that none of the guys with their guns had run away at that point.
And so what about the aftermath of this?
Well, the aftermath was that this thing, still hovering in the sky above us, all the lights on it turned off, and then it became like an amber color. The whole thing did.
Really?
And it very slowly moved about 45 degrees as we just kind of watched it, and then started to move away slowly, as if to say, I'm done with you guys. I'm going to go somewhere else and mess around with someone else right now. And so we got into the cars again and did what we could to follow it through a couple of the different counties, and again through the car radios, we were able to come upon different police officers in different places. We knew where they were. We found them, and I interviewed them to have them tell me what they saw. Two officers said they were just sitting in their car, and they saw this thing coming toward them from the front, and it moved at a pretty fast pace. And then as they watched it, instead of it slowing down, it did an instant 90-degree angle turn to the left, like boom, boom, and it was gone.
Wow.
So that was
now we have a listener now that's from North Carolina. He wanted to know where exactly this happened.
Lumberton.
Okay.
If he knows where Lumberton is, it's south, I believe, south of Fayetteville.
Now, had this been reported prior? Did you say? Because obviously, it must have been the reason you went there. But had it been reported after as well?
Only in the local press, because when I was down there, I met some of the reporters who had been there. I forget the name of the local Lumberton newspaper. And I had been interviewed by them as well when I was down there, and so there was some residual sightings and post encounter interviews that they wanted to do, but I had eventually sent all of my interviews back up to Northwestern University, where Dr. Hynek was waiting for this stuff. But I wanted to say that the final interview that I did was I came upon a police chief who was sitting in his patrol car. He had been on patrol around a lake outside of Lumberton, and I went over to his car, and he was still sitting in the car, and I said to him, "So I understand you had an experience here tonight?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I was just sitting in my car, and all of a sudden the whole inside of the car just lit right up." And I said, "What did you do?" And I had a vision when he told me this of Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He said he leaned out the window and looked up, and he said this thing was just sitting there in the sky right above his car. And I said, "Wow, all right. What did you do next?" He said he got out of his car, walked slowly over to the trunk of his car, and he pulled out this big old official police lantern that are used in emergencies to light up areas when they need them for emergency situations. He stood there, he turned the lantern on, he aimed it up at the thing, and he blinked once with it. And he said, the thing blinked back at me. And I went, "Really? Then what did you do?" He said, "Well, I aimed it again, and I blinked twice. And it blinked twice."
Wow.
And then it went away. Like, wow, really?
You do hear that. There's a number of cases where there's interaction like this. There's the one in, I can't remember, the Father Gill case. That was one of them.
Oh, in New Guinea.
Yes. And then there was one in traffic. There was where a car had pulled over, and the same thing, they flashed the lights from their car at it, and the lights blinked, in sequence. So that's really quite amazing.
Yeah, and it's like, you hear so many different kinds of stories, and people always wonder if there's any aggression attached to these encounters, and if there is, who initiates the aggression, and people then will think, well, if people really are being abducted, as we've heard so many stories now over the decades, wouldn't that be considered a total form of aggression, as with the Travis Walton case? But even in the Travis Walton case, it as years went by, when you listen to Travis telling his story, it didn't appear as if the UFO that he saw was trying to be aggressive toward him. He now thinks
it's a
that
rescue.
he was that he was brought on board this thing to be revived by them and then later to be let go. So it's a very interesting story and stories that we hear about.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say I was very happy to have seen the flying Dorito, and I will tell you this: years later, my friend David Marlowe. I'm not sure if you've met David. Mm-hmm. David has an excellent book out called Triangular UFOs, and before he and I met, he was already investigating like the aftermath years later of the Lumberton, North Carolina incident. And in his book, and he now continues to tell people that in 1975, that encounter that I was part of, that was the first multiple witness encounter of a triangular UFO in America, which I didn't, of course, I didn't know at the time. That's why when Dr. Hynek told me it was a triangular shape, and I thought, wow, really? Why do I want to see that? But now that's almost all you hear about.
It's a pretty high percentage.
UFOs. Yeah, it really is something. It's like their models have improved.
Yeah, I've said that a few times. The newer model. So the continuing aftermath. You bring this report up. Are you curtailed at all about writing about this? You're not.
No, and I didn't want to write any more about it because I was still in the middle of producing my UFO record album, and I had given enough notes and information about my experience that I passed it on to Dr. Hynek, and then he compiled other information, and they ended up at his Center for UFO Studies publishing this. I think it was just called the Lumberton Report of North Carolina, 1978. It happened over 2 weekends in early April of 1978 that I went down there.
Did you actually call him and talk, or see him in person, or call him and talk to him on the phone and say, "This really happened to me. I saw this. It's spectacular. How did all that happen?"
There's a picture that appeared in one of the newspapers, and I can send it to you at some other point. In one of the local Lumberton newspapers, I was in the sheriff's department on the phone talking with Dr. Hynek back in the outskirts of Illinois, of Chicago. A picture of me talking with him, and this was like after the event, and you can't really get the sense. You just see me sitting there talking, but I'm basically saying to him, "Wow, look at what you sent me to get in the middle of. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll never, ever doubt you again if you want me to go see anything else."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. It was
what an experience that is. There's a question that came in on our forums, and it says, let's see who wrote this. I'm sorry. Bill wrote this question. You wrote a nice article recently where you mentioned the very opposing views of two astronauts, Alan Bean and Edgar Mitchell, on the question of alien visitation. Mitchell admits not having had firsthand experience with ETs, but says that others who have worked in the space program had confided with him that alien visitation was real. As some long-time residents, this is kind of a long one, families in the Roswell area who have direct knowledge of the Roswell event. What do you personally think about Mitchell's claims?
Well, I've interviewed Edgar Mitchell when he was still alive many times, and he was always very honest about the fact that he himself had never seen a UFO. even when he was on the Apollo mission that took him to the moon, he didn't see anything that he would consider totally unexplained, but he was always insistent that he had been in contact with and had many meetings with people in and around the Pentagon in Washington, other military people, other astronauts, who assured him that Earth had been and was being visited by someone from somewhere. And he told me it wouldn't surprise him if these whatever visitors they were from wherever were possibly using the moon as a great base of operations from which to look at us, because really, what better place would there be? But he always wanted to maintain as much credibility about the subject as he could. He was a scientist, and he couldn't afford to make up wild statements. Now, about a year ago, he actually helped me kind of get him out of a jam about a story that one of the British tabloids had written about him, claiming that Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell, according to him, quote, aliens intervened and prevented World War III. And they went on to have different quotes from him, supposedly, about how aliens came down and helped to prevent that kind of a conflict.
It's true, right?
Well, what, that they came down, or that they stopped World War III? Are you trying to trick me? Well, I talked with my editor at first, and I said, look, this doesn't sound like something that Edgar Mitchell would say. And so the first thing I did was I contacted the writer of that tabloid, and I said to him, look, I'm giving you a heads up here. I'm going to be talking to Edgar Mitchell about these quotes that you say he said, and I don't think he's going to agree with these quotes, and so I'm going to write my own version of this story, and you might not like how the version turns out. So is there anything you want to tell me now before I contact Edgar, because he will talk to me? And the guy said to me, oh, no, I did it. I wrote the story. I interviewed Edgar, and it's all true. I've got great notes. And I said to him, well, okay, notes are one thing, but did you record the interview conversation with him? Because that would certainly nail it if you actually had a recording of him saying these things. No, I didn't record it, but I take really good notes. And I said, all right. So I called Edgar, recorded the conversation, and even through email, he wrote back to me and said, nope. In fact, I sent him, the clipping, the story from that tabloid, and he basically said, those quotes did not originate from me. I never spoke to this guy. It's a complete, bastion of lies. And so I wrote my story, and my piece came out, and then I heard from the author of the original piece, and I don't mind telling you this, or telling the readers this. It's really important, folks, everybody out there. If you're going to read any UFO stories that come out from the majority of the tabloids that are out there from overseas, read them with a grain of salt, and I strongly urge you to not believe everything that you read by these publications, because they just love to manipulate stuff and make some stuff up to bring in the audience numbers, and it's not always true. And if you can find other publications that are more well known and more based in credibility, I would read those and kind of see what they have to say. I can't stress that enough. There have been many times in recent years when I've had my stories from HuffPost suddenly appear a few days later in one or more of these tabloids, almost word for word. My story including the quotes from exclusive interviews I did with people that I interviewed for my story, and the quotes are there. And instead of at the top of the story where there should have been my byline, where it should have said Lee Spiegel or Huffington Post or something, the byline simply said staff reporter.
Now, let me ask you this. Is it because they're overseas that it's just too much trouble to do anything legally about something like this?
Well, every time that this has happened, I contact my editor and I said, okay, here we go again. And he'll always say the same thing to me. Send me the link to your story. Send me the link to their story, and I will forward it to our legal department, and we'll try and get a cease and desist and have them take the story off. And it doesn't always work that way. It's very hard, even though you can prove that they did this. It's unbelievable to me how this happens or why this happens. It's very frustrating, not only for people like Edgar Mitchell, who are credible people, but for someone like myself who has even an ounce of integrity about the stuff that I write about. And I still have people sending me comments to my stories telling me that I'm totally out of my mind, that I don't have any idea what I'm writing about. I should go back to that rock from where I came. It really, I'll tell you, Martin, there have been some times when I've actually thought of just giving it all up and just letting everybody have their own way with it and leave me alone. I'll go get a job somewhere where my only responsibility to people will be for me to say something like, "Would you like fries with that?"
Well, I want to tell the listener, if you go to podcastufo.com and you go to the show notes for this show, at the very bottom, you will see a link to the archives of all of Lee's stories. They're very, very good, from talking about planets to UFOs to astronauts to space junk, which is another question that came up. The space garbage, I should say. So there is another question here for you on that. Someone has asked a question a couple of times in the chat room, and I don't have any idea if this means anything to you or not, but does your guitar have the Dorito shape?
My guitar?
Yes, and then the second question was, have you considered the Dorito portrait for one of your album covers? Now, you don't do music anymore, do you?
No, and I'm wondering how this person knows that I even have a guitar. I actually have 3 guitars. I have 3 magnificent.
Oh, they know a lot about you.
Oh my God! And is that your fault?
No.
Are you the guy who's making up all that stuff about
his initials are MIB, whatever that means.
Okay, well, where have we heard that before? Are those the guys that keep following me home every night through the subway system of New York City, dressed in black?
Yeah.
So he wants to know if my guitar is Dorito shaped.
Yeah, I think he has a sense of humor. I'm not really sure. But let me read to you this article let me read you this question about the space garbage that came in from Bill as well. In your recent article, NASA claims of UFOs near the space station are a bunch of space garbage, which I saw some of the pictures. I saw that article that you wrote. In addition to presenting the NASA response, you also included some interesting videos that appear to show some anomalous objects not easily explained away as space junk nor window reflections. What do you personally think about the video is capturing of seeming anomalous objects near the ISS?
Well, first of all, I will tell you and everyone that whenever I have contacted NASA, and I have several really good, strong contacts at NASA headquarters in Washington, and they basically say, when it comes to things like people claiming to spot UFOs outside the space station, because there are a lot of people out there who have a lot of time to kill, and they just sit in front of their computers, and they know that NASA does offer live video streams from the space station outside the various windows. And so there are people who they'll sit there and they'll just watch and watch. And any little thing that seems to fly by or float by or zigzag has to be from Alpha Centauri. And I say that not to ridicule anyone, but my take on this is, look, first of all, if there was ever any real danger from UFOs near our International Space Station, if NASA or other countries felt that it was a danger to the people on board the space station to have them there while UFOs are flying around, do you think we would allow any people to be on the space station and put their lives at risk like that? No. And nobody ever thinks about that. It's like, it doesn't seem to concentrate in the minds of people anything other than it must be, UFOs are watching us. They were watching the Apollo astronauts on the moon. Well, would we have continued to send astronauts to the moon and have them walking around and driving around if we actually thought that their lives might be in danger by aliens? I can't fathom that.
I mean, their lives were in danger to go anyway, but still.
That's right. I just say to people, you got to keep it simple. Let's keep all of this in the right perspective. Keep it simple. Statistically, it's still something like maybe 97% of all UFO reports and sightings can be and are explainable.
That's right. Yeah.
And there's always that small percentage, but even that small percentage is a big number. And too easily, I find that researchers and organizations, if they can't figure out what the thing was, they just classify it as unknown and move to the next thing. Well, fine, then do that. But there are too many people right now, and there always have been. And I'm not going to name names because it's not my place to do that. I'm not a great believer or fan of people who tease the public with, well, in the next couple of months, I'm going to come out with some information that's going to be absolute ultimate disclosure of UFOs. So just hold on, because it's going to happen in May.
You talking about the recent Tom DeLonge, for instance?
Well, I'm not mentioning names.
Okay.
I have followed his exploits. And there are other people out there who've been doing this even a little longer than DeLonge, who have a tendency to promise things to the public. And then when it comes time for the great reveal, there is no reveal.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
It happens a lot. And the only people that it hurts are the people who believe that this stuff is going to happen, and people who spend money looking ahead to go to where the great reveal is going to be, and to be there and to buy books from these people and the videos. And then so where are all these big things of disclosure that I've been hearing about since I first got into this 44 years ago?
44 years, wow.
I started researching this stuff in 1973.
Amazing.
And I have interviewed many people in military, in law enforcement, airline pilots, military pilots, people in the government, law enforcement, scientists. There was recently, and I forget where I saw this, but there was a thing that came out that said no self-respecting scientist worth his or her merit will even possibly consider the fact that some UFOs might come from other planets. Well, you know what? That's just not true. there are many scientists of equal credentials to the debunkers who say there is something going on here and should be scientifically looked into. And those are the people who I like to talk to. Because many people, especially scientists, they rely on their work on the funding that they get from either from universities or other organizations. And if they don't get their funding, they don't earn a living, basically. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of these people won't talk about it. That's why many airline pilots won't talk about their frequent encounters, because they may not have a job. And so they are able to report to Dr. Richard Haynes' organization called NARCAP, where pilots can anonymously report their sightings in a comfortable way and not be ridiculed, because they do have sightings of things that they cannot explain, and those people should be listened to.
Right,
I think.
Absolutely. Someone posted up a couple of times, they wanted to know what your thoughts were on possible ET telepathy. And with that, I'd like to ask you if you've ever interviewed anyone that talked about that. And then one last thought about that is, did you feel, when that thing was right over you, did you feel anything unusual besides the fear?
No, I'll answer that part of it first. No, I was just more excited than anything else. I just wanted to follow that sucker wherever it went and get as much information about it as I could, because I knew, back there in 1975, I didn't suspect that we had those kinds of test vehicles, military test vehicles, that were being tested and flown in rural North Carolina. And also back then, I had never heard of any place called Area 51 in the desert of Nevada. None of us had. So I was just very, very curious about what it was. Obviously, it meant no harm to me or to the others who were with me, so I didn't have a problem chasing it.
But what about the telepathy thing? Have you ever interviewed anyone that mentioned that from an encounter?
Are you referring to people who claim that they've had telepathic communications with an ET?
I think that's what the question is basically asking, yes. Or what your thoughts, they were asking what your thoughts were on that.
Okay. Well, why don't they just close their mind and their eyes, and I'll send them my telepathy on that. Sorry. No, you know what? I don't really know the answer to that, how I feel, because I have not to date had an opportunity to interview many people who claim this experience. This is possibly part and parcel to the UFO abduction scenario, and it may not be. I know that many people claim that they're in touch with extraterrestrials. I don't know. I will say this. I will not ridicule anyone and tell them that they're out of their minds, they're psychotic, go get help, you need some serious drugs. I will never say that kind of thing to people, because I don't know. I don't know what their state of mind is, and many of these people, maybe most of these people, maybe all of them are very healthy in body and mind, and are experiencing something that they didn't ask for. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this field, and I'll never claim to be. All I do is interview people and present their stories. I rarely indicate in my own stories what I feel about this stuff. I feel like it's better for me to stay neutral, because I don't consider myself important to all of this. What's important is how it's all going to turn out down the road. Because there is an answer. There is a truth of all of this.
Yes.
And it will happen at some point. I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime, and I'm sorry about that, but I think it will happen. I did this story last week about three scientists who just were awarded. They just made it to Time Magazine's top 100 list of the most influential people in the world, and three of these people are planet hunters. And I'm going to give you a couple of numbers here that just are incredible. One of them said that with the Kepler spacecraft that has been detecting planets right and left for years, it has detected a potential almost 5,000 exoplanets. But what that really means is it'll come back with information, and then scientists have to take the data from the spacecraft and test it to see how many of those 5,000 actually can be confirmed as planetary bodies. And they have to really put it through a lot of tests. So far, 2,500 have been confirmed exoplanets. I mean, geez, I remember when I was a kid, if anyone was to say to me, there are going to be a lot more planets than the ones in our solar system, and we're all going to know about them, I would have said, you're nuts. That's just Star Trek. But here we are. And this scientist said last week, and this is an amazing statistic, because of the vast numbers of stars in the Milky Way, and because of the vast numbers of galaxies that we now believe are out there, like as Carl Sagan used to say, billions and billions of galaxies, okay? Here's the statistic that scientists, astronomers do believe that every star that you see in the sky has at least one planet in orbit around it. That's pretty amazing. It's an amazing statement.
Yes, wow.
And she went one step further and said, every time you look into the night sky, instead of thinking to yourself that you're looking at stars, say to yourself, I'm looking at many solar systems. I love that. That's like, what a way to put it. The statistics are there. We now know there are billions and billions and trillions of planets out there. But the key is how many of those, you have to break it down step by step by step. Of the 2,500 planets that have been confirmed by the Kepler spacecraft, about 36 of those planets have been determined to be in what they call the Goldilocks zone, or the habitable zone in orbit around their star, meaning they're not too far to the planet, they're not too far away from it, and they're in that zone near the equator where things on the planet itself could be suitable for liquid water and for atmospheric conditions and to be habitable. So it's like amazing.
It is exciting.
And it's amazing work. And, none of these scientists, none of them are saying anything like, well, yeah, we're going to be in touch with aliens in the next 5 years. Nobody is saying that. All that they can possibly hope for at this point is, well, we'll probably get lucky and maybe find some microbes that actually just indicates life, either on another planet or on Europa, the moon of Jupiter, or Enceladus of Saturn. Right in our own little solar system, right in our own galactic neighborhood, there are places, there are asteroids. I did a piece on asteroids a couple of weeks ago where NASA would love to go to one of the big asteroids called Ceres. And they believe that under the crust of the surface of Ceres lies a liquid ocean.
Wow.
And their speculation is that we know from places on Earth where we have found water and where there should be no life, there is life. And so this is it's an amazing time we live in. I often think that I was born too early. I think I should have been born or reborn in the time of Starfleet and the Enterprise.
Well, it might come sooner than you think. Speaking of come sooner than you think, do you believe that it's already time to go? It seemed like it just went by so fast.
I'm going to keep talking for another hour.
I could.
You can turn me off if you want.
You'll be alone in your little room. No.
I have contacts in very high places.
No, thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure. I'll always love having you on the show, and we'd love to get you back again sooner than this time. I think I can't remember the last time you were on, maybe 6 months or something like that.
Well, I think you and I and our friend Alejandro Rojas, we did like a year-end.
Yeah, that's always fun.
Best of UFOs. That's fun.
Yeah, that's a blast. But thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure, Lee. All right,
you Martin.
Take care. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening tonight. And next week, if all goes well, I'm going to be on site in Connecticut at an astronomer's home. And so please tune in, Mark D'Antonio, next week. And so thank you so much for listening and supporting the show. I really appreciate it. And remember, as always, to keep your eyes to the sky.